Ukraine just dealt Russia another devastating blow. In a masterstroke of tactics and planning, the Ukrainian armed forces were able to totally obliterate a Russian bomber base, dealing millions of dollars of damage in the process. It's a move that calls to mind the iconic Operation Spiderweb attack of earlier this year, and one that leaves the Kremlin with yet more costly problems to solve. The attack itself occurred overnight on August 16, continuing into the early hours of August 17, and it involved a strike on the Voronezh Malshevo airbase, otherwise known as the Baltimore airbase, situated in the Voronezh region of western Russia. The base is home to Russia's 47th Composite Guards Aviation Regiment and 108th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment, and is controlled by the 6th Air and Air Defense Forces Army. There wasn't much news at the time of the attack, but in the days since it happened, online open source intelligence analysts have been reviewing satellite images of the airbase, and they've made some astonishing findings. The CyberBoroshno intelligence group took a leading role in the investigation and shared what it had found in a lengthy Telegram post published on August 27. Analyzing satellite images, it can be confirmed that as a result of the attack on August 16-17, the training ground of the 108th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment and the Baltimore airfield in the Voronezh region, radars 76N6 and 30H6 en masse, and most likely two Su-24 were hit. 76N6 is a radar station for detecting targets at high and medium altitudes, which is part of the S-300 system, in this case the S-300 PM2. 30N6 is a radar for targeting and illuminating targets, which ensures the operation of anti-aircraft missile systems of the same system. This is evidenced by traces of burning at the locations of the equipment, which had been in the indicated position for a long time, but disappeared from the images after the strike. According to available information, other objects were also damaged, but these were the ones that could be confirmed by satellite data. To break that down, according to the experts, Ukraine's attack on the Baltimore airbase resulted in either damage or destruction of two key radar systems, a 76N6 radar station and a 30N6 targeting radar. As CyberBoroshno notes, both of these radars are key components in Russia's S-300 missile system, which it uses to defend high-value locations, like the airbase itself, against incoming air raids and cruise missile strikes. The S-300 dates back to the Soviet era, but still plays an integral role in Russian air defenses, and it simply cannot function without its radar components. The radars scan the system's surroundings to identify and lock onto targets, feeding data to the central command post, which then uses that information to filter out false targets, identify viable ones, and launch missiles to bring them down. To be more precise, the 76N6 radar's job is to spot targets at medium to high altitudes, while the 30N6 radar handles tracking and target illumination. Both play vital roles, and without those radars, the S-300 is effectively blind. It can't spot targets, so it has no way of firing at them. In short, it's utterly useless, and it's worth noting that each system is worth up to $150 million. This is a very expensive piece of hardware, but Ukraine's attack rendered it worthless, unless Russia wants to invest the necessary money, manpower, and resources to fix it. Even then, that could take weeks or even months. In the meantime, the Baltimore airbase appears to be more or less defenseless. But the S-300 wasn't the only target taken out in Ukraine's awe-inspiring attack. As the open source intelligence analysts note, when looking at images of the base before and after the attack, it's easy to see that something else has changed. Before the attack, satellite imagery showed a pair of Sukhoi Su-24 tactical bombers parked at the airfield. They appear to have been sitting there for at least a month prior to the strike. But when looking at images post-August 16, the bombers have both disappeared. All that remains in their place are burn marks, suggesting a large fire broke out exactly where the planes were parked. Su-24s, like a lot of equipment Russia has been using lately, are several decades old. In fact, they were designed way back in the 1960s and first flew in 1967, entering service in 1974, while various upgraded variants were introduced over the years, like the Su-24M in the early 1980s. Production of these planes ended in 1993. They've been exported to various countries around the world, with the likes of Algeria, Iran and Sudan still operating Su-24s today. Ukraine also has a small number of them, while Russia is estimated to have approximately 260. Despite its age, the Su-24 still has some relevance today. Designed for high-speed, low-altitude flight in order to evade enemy radar systems, it can work well in certain environments, especially contested airspaces where enemy air defenses are often occupied with other targets. Each Su-24 can carry over 17,000 pounds of bombs and missiles too, so they're more than capable of dealing significant damage when used effectively. These are also all-weather bombers, able to fly day or night in almost any conditions, making them a versatile option in the Kremlin's arsenal. With that said, they're still massively outdated in many areas, like avionics, and they lack the survivability and reliability of more modern strike aircraft. Even Russia, which has recently been forced to rely on decades-old tanks and other ancient equipment due to the desperate situation in which it finds itself, generally considers the Su-24 to be obsolete. Its forces preferred to use the more modern Su-34 instead, with the remaining fleet of Su-24s largely operated by Russia's naval aviation. As such, analysts have suggested two possibilities for the blown-up Su-24 bombers at the Baltimore airbase. They were either outdated airframes that Russia was simply keeping in reserve for a rainy day, or there may have been specialized Su-24MR variants, specially designed for reconnaissance missions. The Su-24MR, or Fencer-E variants of the Su-24, first flew in 1980 and entered service a few years later. They're fitted with additional surveillance equipment compared to the originals, including sensors, side-looking airborne radars and infrared recon systems. During the war, they've often been seen soaring above the border regions of Ukraine, scanning their surroundings and gathering intelligence for the Kremlin's commanders. Price-wise, Su-24s were worth around $25 million each around the turn of the millennium, but don't hold much value nowadays. Even so, they're still worth something to Russia, since the Kremlin keeps quite a large stock of these aircraft in storage or parked up at airfields far and wide across its vast territory. And President Vladimir Putin won't be too pleased to hear of yet more military equipment set ablaze by Ukraine. There aren't any details on how exactly Ukraine conducted this attack, though there were reports of swarms of Ukrainian drones in the Voronezh area that same night. Some of them struck a major railway hub in the Russian city of Lyski, with residents reporting around 6 explosions sounding out in the early hours of August 17. It's certainly possible that some of those same drones made it to Baltimore airbase, setting the Su-24 bombers alight and dealing serious damage to the S-300 missile system radars. It's yet another example in the ever-increasing series of successful Ukrainian strikes on high-value Russian targets. Many attacks like this have unfolded in recent weeks and months. Operation Spiderweb, which took place on June 1st, was the most notable, dominating headlines around the world. It was Ukraine's biggest and best attack on Russian soil, involving numerous swarms of drones secretly concealed on seemingly innocuous trucks, which were then driven to strategic locations all over Russia. Once the trucks were in position, not far from 4 major airfields, their roofs retracted and the drones were let loose, raining havoc on dozens of Russian bombers and other aircraft and dealing billions of dollars of damage in the process. However, even though Operation Spiderweb was the most talked about of Ukraine's deep strikes into Russia, it was far from the only one. There have been dozens of others, hitting targets like oil refineries, pipelines, command posts, ammunition depots, logistic hubs, airfields, drone production plants, and other military facilities. Some attacks are relatively small, with only minor damages here and there, while others are much larger and more significant, leaving Russia with severe losses and gigantic repair bills. All of them, however, leave a mark. All go some way towards weakening the Kremlin's war machine and evening the odds of the conflict. And these attacks are happening all the time. With every passing week comes news of fresh successful strikes, each one piling on more problems for Putin and his Kremlin cronies. On August 20, for example, video footage emerged of the Ukrainian National Guard using UAVs to wipe out a Russian S-300V air defense launcher in the occupied Zaporizhia region of southeast Ukraine. The video was shared on Telegram by journalist Yuri Butasov, who also wrote the caption, "The fighters of the Lazar Separate Special Forces Detachment of the 27th Pechursk Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine in the Zaporizhia direction destroyed the S-300V air defense system worth $40 million. A spectacular detonation of the ammunition and a complete burnout, all in one brilliant work." Now, the self-propelled launcher, along with 2 transport launch containers, was sitting on a road in Russian-controlled territory when Ukraine's drones entered the area. The footage shows the drone striking the system, before its missiles suddenly explode, triggering a gigantic explosion and huge fire. The system, worth an estimated $40 million, was wiped out entirely, and the same can likely be said of any Russian personnel that were in the area at the time. Earlier this month, Ukraine also celebrated another big win in Crimea, carrying out a successful drone strike in the early hours of August 4 at the occupied Saki airbase. A security service of Ukraine's statement detailed the results of the operation. Last night, drones of A targeted the Saki military airbase in temporarily occupied Crimea. It's a key Russian airbase for operations in the Black Sea. The strike on the airfield damaged an aviation weapons depot. One Su-30SM aircraft was completely destroyed and another was damaged. 3 Su-24 aircraft were also hit. The enemy suffered significant losses. The average cost of a Su-30SM fighter jet is between $35 to $50 million. The operation carried out by the SSU Special Operations Center A also damaged an aviation weapons depot at the airfield. The successful special operation of the SSU in Saki is another step towards weakening the enemy's ability to wage a war of aggression against Ukraine. The occupiers must remember that they will never feel safe on our land. Another Russian fighter jet destroyed, 4 other aircraft damaged, millions more dollars worth of damage. Days later, on August 8, also in Crimea, a Ukrainian drone reportedly wiped out one of Russia's latest and greatest developments, the S-500 radar system. Again, it was the CyberBoroshno open source analyst group that reported this news. The group analyzed a video released by Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate, HUR, which showed the drones in action. At the time, it was believed that an older S-400 system had been hit, but CyberBoroshno's analysts came to a different conclusion. In yesterday's HUR video, what caught our attention was the reported hit on a 96L6 radar from an S-400 system, except it wasn't a 96L6. We analysed the visual features and can say with confidence it was the 98L6 Yenisei standard radar for the S-500 Prometei missile system. CyberBoroshno summed up by saying, "We hit an S-500 radar with a Ukrainian drone. It's designed to detect ballistic missiles, hypersonic vehicles, stealth aircraft, low-orbit satellites, and highly maneuverable aerial targets." This just goes to show how well the Ukrainian forces have mastered the art of drone warfare. For long periods of the war, Ukraine has been forced to endure nightly drone attacks, with Russia sending hundreds or even thousands of drones into the country each month, targeting everything from small towns and settlements to cities, wiping hospitals, schools and residential buildings off the map, striking fear into the hearts of innocent civilians and brave soldiers who are simply doing their bit to protect their country. But over the last year, Ukraine has turned the tables. It's given Russia a taste of its own medicine, developing its own destructive drones and carrying out one successful strike after another. And it doesn't matter whether Ukraine is taking out cutting-edge radars in Crimea or Soviet-era bombers in Voronezh. All of these attacks matter. All of them have an impact one way or another. Even the smallest strikes cause at least some sort of financial or military losses for Russia to deal with. Larger strikes, meanwhile, can take radars offline and leave the Kremlin with gigantic gaps in their air defenses, opening the path for even more destructive successive strikes. Right now, Russia is struggling with serious economic hardship brought on by Putin's reckless spending on the war. The country has committed far too heavily to the conflict, pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into procuring and producing weapons, recruitment drives, and military operations. It's drawn huge amounts from its national wealth fund and suffered the effects of numerous waves of sanctions imposed upon it by the US, European Union, and other Western countries. Numerous financial experts within Russia have warned of a dramatic recession unless something changes quickly, and even Putin has been forced to backtrack and slash spending for 2026 to help ease the financial strain on his country. Meanwhile, big Russian banks are struggling with record-level loan defaults and other issues, and the situation shows no real sign of getting better anytime soon. So, when Ukraine launches yet another massive attack on a Russian airbase, oil refinery, or other important logistical or military location, that too takes a toll. It weakens the economy even further and gives Putin one more bill to pay. And, in the end, this all trickles down to the average Russians on the street, many of whom have not only seen friends or family members killed or injured in the war so far, but also face ever-increasing and increasingly challenging living costs, with the prices of many everyday essentials almost doubling in recent times. Bit by bit, this all plays a part in bringing the national mood down across Russia, making more people resentful of Putin and damaging his legacy too. Plus, with more bills to pay and less money to spend, Russia will invariably find it even harder to push on and claim any kind of victory in this war. A war that is increasingly viewed, even inside Russia, as both futile and utterly unsustainable. Attacks like the recent strike on the Baltimore airbase also caused disruption in Russia in other ways. After each Ukrainian strike, Russian commanders naturally have to look at what happened and work out how, yet again, Ukrainian drones or missiles have managed to bypass their air defenses, sneak by their radars, and strike such valuable, important targets. Often, they're likely left with far more questions than answers and forced to second-guess their systems, soldiers, and intelligence services as they seek someone or something to blame. They also may have to readjust their tactics or reposition other assets, like radars, missile systems, and so on, to compensate for those they've lost. This all leads to a lot of wasted time, resources, and manpower, and it takes focus away from Russia's frontline assaults and other offensive maneuvers, as the Kremlin has to instead work on fortifying its defenses. And the more these attacks happen, the worse the situation gets. Each one undermines Russia's confidence in its military and weakens its position, leaving Russian soldiers and officers wondering where and when their enemy will strike next, but seemingly having no clear way of stopping them. Thanks to that, Russians are reaching the point where they never feel safe, even on their own home ground. That's exactly what Ukrainians have been made to feel ever since the invasion began, and once more, Kyiv has managed to give Moscow a major taste of its own ugly medicine. Meanwhile, on the Ukrainian side, attacks like these all help to inspire morale and motivate both the troops and the general public. They prove that, despite being the underdog in this war in many ways, Ukraine is more than capable of not only defending itself, but also planning and executing some truly monumental counterattacks and deep strikes far beyond its borders. They show that Kyiv can and will cripple the Kremlin's war machine, one strike at a time. And while these attacks won't win the war for Ukraine, they will at the very least help the country assert itself and deal some damage, rather than having to focus all of its efforts and energies entirely on defense. In other words, by giving Russia something to worry about on its own soil, the Ukrainian armed forces can buy themselves a bit of time and breathing room, while also saving lives and minimizing the offensive output of their enemies. That's why every strike, no matter how big or small, is a cause for celebration in Kyiv and frustration in Moscow. Now, hear more good news for Ukraine and terrible news for Russia in our recent video, looking at how Belgium has just confirmed a shipment of F-16 fighter jets on their way to Ukraine, which could help Kyiv assert dominance in the air by the end of this year. Alternatively, discover how Ukraine's latest strategic shift in drone strike targets is triggering a colossal crisis in the Kremlin. And finally, make sure to subscribe to our trusted channel too, so you can be among the first to find out about the most important news and developments from the front lines of Ukraine and beyond.